All right, welcome back to SQL in the City. Hopefully you've had a nice break and you've been enjoying the day so far. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about how we can minimize the impact of potential data breaches in our dev and test environments. And this is certainly one of those areas that means a lot to me as somebody that's been both a developer and a DBA, and I'm always concerned about the security aspects of what we do. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Jones, and I've been doing this a long time. I've been working with databases almost my entire career, and with SQL Server itself, I've had over 26 years of working with the platform. And I've been a DBA, and I've been a developer, I've been a manager, a project manager, owner of a company, I guess. And in that time, I've had the experience to work in a variety of different companies, different industries throughout there. And now I've actually worked across 3 platforms with SQL Server. So I started with OS2, and then I moved to Windows, and now I actually have SQL Server running on Linux, and all the versions that have been released from 4.2 up to the present 2017. So that's been a lot of my experience, and it's helped me to see various different environments and various different situations that affect how we do development and how we worry about security. Now, I also founded SQL Server Central. About 15, 16 years ago, my goal was there to help you become better at your job every day. I had partners, Andy Warren and Brian Knight, that helped us build the site, and then eventually Redgate purchased that site a while ago. So now I work for Redgate Software as an evangelist, but I still do run SQL Server Central, still trying to make you better at your job every day. And then I'm honored that Microsoft has actually recognized me as a data platform MVP for the last decade. All the work I do in the community, speaking and writing and trying to help others, it's been nice to just do it, but it's very nice that Microsoft recognized that as well. Excuse me. So with that, let's get going. So I want to start talking a little bit about security just in a general sense. Now, I'm sure all of you know that data breaches are on the rise, that we see them all the time in the news and media and different situations. And it seems that we're always struggling to properly secure our data. And this is our area, right? This is those of us that are DBAs, developers that build software and manage systems. We need to protect that data. It's very important. Now, I've got this little graph on the screen, and it's from the Identity Research Center, or Identity Theft Resource Center. And they've been tracking this stuff for a long time. I think their first year was 2004, 2005, but they've seen things rise. And you can see the last few years here that data breaches are on the rise regularly. There was a point where we had just over 1 a year, just over 400 a year, so just over 1 a day. Now we're at the point where we're having over 4, almost 5 a day that are occurring. Some of these are small, some of these are large, but it's becoming a constant problem. And Europe has tried to address that with the GDPR, trying to get companies to focus more on security. Hopefully some of that will happen in the US as well, but the idea is that we need to protect our data better, and some of that falls on our shoulders. Those of us that work in the technical area, that we manage systems, that we build software, we need to make sure that we're protecting our data. And it's not just our production environment. Certainly we spend lots of money in our production environments trying to ensure there's security there. We have firewalls, we have tight access controls, we're much more careful. But we have to worry about our development and test areas as well, which is really where I want to focus today. Now, you can see on some of these items I've listed here, there's been breaches in these development areas. Shutterfly was a big one. They had an internal test environment where they were working through their software deployments, trying to ensure that the software worked as appropriate. And they lost data from that environment. A number of customers had their data exposed. And so Shutterfly certainly was embarrassed by that, and hopefully they put more controls in place. But there have been other ones as well. The ACC is a cardiology group in America, and they had a huge exposure where they had patient data lost from a development system, from various contractors that were working on software that they use for their medical practices, for helping other cardiologists do their work. And this was patient data. So the bad thing here was it wasn't the ACC so much as they relied on outside contractors. And their level of security or their protections relied on the security of those contractors, which wasn't good enough. And then in the US, the VA administration, the Veterans Administration, was a big one. I have a lot of friends that have served in the military. When this one came out, they were very upset because many of them hadn't been in the military for years and years, but they still were part of the VA system because they still got their benefits, still had the access to hospitals, but a lot of their personal identifiable information was lost. So they were potentially victims of identity theft. I actually have a few people that have been stung by this, and they've had to change credit cards and work through issues in their life because their information was out there. And there's plenty more environments as well. We're seeing more and more that while lots of the data breaches occur through hacking, there's a fair amount that occur through employee mistakes, human error, accidents that occur. But dev and test environments is a big area as well, where we don't provide as much security as we do in production, but we're still putting the data in those environments and they're being attacked as well. We want to use that production data, which is one of the main problems. This is from our State of Database DevOps report, and in here we found, as we surveyed customers and potential customers, many of them actually do want to use production data. You can see 83% here really want to, and only a small percentage would avoid using that production data. And it's really because this makes our lives easier. First of all, we can just grab a data set that's known, that's relevant to our system from production, copy it over to our test environments or to our development environments. It's very easy for us to do that. The other thing is that the data means something to us. Often when I'm working on software, when I'm building some feature, I have a business person or a customer or a client, somebody that is requesting a change, requesting enhancement. They'll show me data from production. They'll show me why something should be different, how it should change, how some feature should work. And by using those cases of data, it's easier for me to build that feature because I can remember what they showed me and it looks familiar. And then if I show them test environments or I show them mock-ups or prototypes, they see that same data as well. And so it's very, very relevant to them. In many cases, using production data makes things just easier. And as part of trying to make things easier, we are also developing a little bit faster. So not only are we trying to meet the needs of our customers, but many of us are caught up in this DevOps area where we're trying to be better at building software. Now, I've been doing kind of DevOps style development for over a decade before it was called DevOps because they're really just good, solid software development practices. But there's some tips and tricks and things that have helped me become better, and more people are starting to adopt those. We're constantly hearing about Amazon, Netflix, and other companies that use DevOps processes, and they're building software faster and they're adapting to customers. Now, Donovan Brown works at Microsoft. He's got this great quote about what DevOps is, and I think it's great because it means that we're really not being bound by some methodology like Agile or Scrum. We're not being bound by, I need to use a relational database or a NoSQL database. We're not worried about the technology, whether it's Java or Python or .NET or anything else. What we're really saying is we have to put people together with processes in any type of platform, and we've got to make sure that we're continuously changing things for our customers. We want to deliver them value for their software. Whether I'm selling software or I'm building it for my company, I need to make sure that I'm continuously doing this. And so in this talk, I really want to focus on a few of the areas in the development test environments that help us build software in a DevOps process, but those are also the areas that we have to worry about for being attacked, being hacked, or losing data that could potentially impact our company. So really, for me, provisioning is a big part of this, and then using that forward in the build and test areas. We want to use these different tools that we have, these different processes to ensure that we can become better at this. And I'll show you some things from Redgate that we think can help you, but ultimately I want you to make sure that you're using a process that protects our data, still allows the development to move at a very fast pace or at whatever pace you need it to move at, and tries to minimize the impact of any mistakes that we make. We all know these days software developers are under pressure to deliver features. With mobile apps, with the pace of technological change as our platforms and tools evolve, as other companies put pressure on us in different ways, application developers, software developers want to go faster. They want to respond to the needs, the requirements, the demands of their customers or of the business. And the database has to follow along because ultimately most of them need a data store of some kind, whether that's a relational database, whether that's a NoSQL database or something else. They have to store their data somewhere. And so the database ultimately cannot be a bottleneck. As much as I've looked at DevOps development and talked with companies and clients, we find that the database is often not addressed, and it's been a problem. It's a bottleneck in many cases because unlike most software, the database has to evolve from state to state. We don't drop the database and rebuild a new one each time we deploy software, which is what we do in many other cases. So the database has to find a way to evolve faster. At Redgate, we've been spending a lot of time in the last 5 or 6 years building tools, building processes, learning from customers and adapting our solutions to meet the needs that you have. So we are really focusing on this database DevOps process so that the database does move faster for you and it isn't that bottleneck in your environment. So with that in mind, I want to show you at least the first beginning of something that happens here. And I want to pop over to Management Studio here and look at something. So I've got a copy of actually the Stack Overflow database here that I want to connect to. And let's connect back in. And if you've ever worked with Stack Overflow, it's a relatively simple database in that there's not a lot of tables in there. And actually, I don't think I have my stack system, so let's see. Let's create one. So in my environment here, I'm actually using part of SQL Provision. This is the SQL clone. And I'm just going to create a database that I could use. The nice thing here, if you've ever worked with Stack Overflow and you've downloaded it, it's gigabytes and gigabytes. I think the latest version, which just was released a week or two ago, is about 300 gigabytes expanded. This one is actually 91 gigabytes. It's from a little over a year ago. And so I've created this database that I want to use. And if I'm doing some development, obviously I'll have the web app, I'll have various items that I want to use, and I'll do different things as I'm trying to build features or I'm trying to test something. It's nice to be able to have a data set that works. In this case, I'm taking a small data set. You can notice there's just a few rows here in this database that I'm working with. And I'm doing something. Maybe I'm testing the ability to edit this data or change something or add a new type or whatever it is. But I'm working along and I'll do something kind of silly sometimes where I'll actually change data without paying attention. And I'm moving too fast and I'm not thinking what I'm doing. I have another problem on my mind, which is how the application works. And I touch my data and I make a mistake. Now, in the past, I'd have kind of blown up this data set. I could certainly request another restore from somebody. I could certainly build something else. But what's nice with SQL Provision is I can quickly kind of reset this in a self-service manner as a developer. So you can see I can just remove this clone that I've built, and I'm just going to create another one. So I'll go back to my instance, and I'll say, let's do the same thing again, and this was stack dev. And I'll create this clone. And you'll notice that 91 gigabytes, if I were to restore that, would take many minutes, tens of minutes, maybe even longer, depending on how fast the thing's running. But in this case, if I come back here and I just look at my data set and I haven't reconnected or closed Management Studio, done anything else, I've kind of got my data back. And I could do the same thing with any other tables, even if I'm not making mistakes, even if I just want to test something. For example, maybe I just want to run this whole thing and I want to undo it. And I think I just have something spelled wrong there, but even if I wanted to just undo a simple data change for testing, I could certainly rewrite the update statement to fix this or copy two of them around. But when I'm working with multiple rows or I'm trying to do a number of things at one time, it's often easier to just kind of reset myself, to rebuild my environment. And that's one of the things that SQL Provision allows us to do. At Redgate, we're trying to not have the database be a bottleneck, which means we want to move faster where possible. So with that in mind, think about the fact that we want to continue to provision things, we want it differently. We want to make sure that developers can work. But as we do that, as we try to move faster, we have some internal conflicts here. So we've got a developer and a DBA here. If you look at the screen, that they internally both have different requirements. They have different things that they're trying to accomplish. And so there's a little bit of tension here, and there's a little bit of conflict that probably many of you have experienced. Right? If you're a developer or a DBA, you've probably struggled at times to get along because different things matter to you, different things are important. So for developers, we typically want to move faster. When I'm building software, I have a list of changes, whether it's a bunch of Post-it notes or it's in a document or a project plan, that a whole list of things that I have to accomplish. And so what I want to be able to do is evaluate those things as quickly as possible. I take one of those, I want to build a solution, and then I want to determine if that solution works. When it's done, I want to commit it to source control. I want to send it over to QA or to somebody else and let it move off my plate. So as I try to do that and as I try to move faster, I also need more realistic data that helps me do this. I can certainly create my own data, but when I do that, I don't always include the edge cases. I don't think about the different ways that customers will work with my application. And so that alone means I might fix a feature or I might implement a feature or fix a bug, and then I haven't thought about all the cases and I haven't solved it. So my goal is to get work done as quickly as possible. And more importantly, I want to work on my pace. So if I work on something fast or if I work on something slow, it takes me many days. I want to be able to build my environment, reset it, get changes from other people. I want to do things at my own pace, which means I want self-service. So if I need a new database, I need a new system, I need a new copy of the code base, I want to be able to get that myself. I don't want to have to submit a ticket, depend on somebody else to unblock me and let me move forward. I want to do things on my own. As a DBA, certainly we want things to proceed, we want our applications to grow, but we have different mandates, things that matter to us. So we have to protect this data. Now, one of the ways we have to do that is we want to know where all these copies are, because it's easy for developers to build perhaps on an out-of-date copy of the database, or that we have multiple copies out there that might not be used and they're requiring resources or taking space. They're impacting our system. So it's important that we know where all the data is, because it allows us to determine a resource allocation and also security. And then one of the things I think is becoming more important, especially in this last year, is that sensitive data in those development environments is a problem. The GDPR took effect earlier this year. Redgate, we've been working hard to not only build tools for you, but we have to comply ourselves. That's something that's important to us as a UK company. And so we realized that having production data that's sensitive, names, tax IDs, emails, things that potentially identify a specific person, we want to sanitize those in some way. We want to move them or change them when they leave that production environment. So the DBA has to do that. If they're going to do that, potentially they're having tension with the developers that just want to move fast with their own system. So we're trying to solve all these problems in a way that will work for both the DBAs and the developers. Part of what we're doing in development is we're provisioning out these environments. We're trying to help things move a little quicker for everybody. And provisioning can be a blocker for DevOps, where we are trying to move faster. Now, many of you may have had to provision environments or request environments, no matter which side you're dealing with, and you find that there's all these issues that occur. So if I have to do a large data set, for example, that Stack Overflow is 91 gigabytes, it takes me time to provision that environment. Even if I had all the resources I need, it just physically takes time for our machines to copy that much data around. And it gets worse. We have many customers at this point that use terabyte-sized databases, which is something I'd never seen in production until I came to Redgate and we had clients. But as the world has continued to evolve and we capture more and more data, a terabyte is not a tremendously large database any longer. But it still takes a lot of time to restore that database or to copy it to another system. So time impacts the developer's ability to move quicker. And not only is it time, but then there's that storage cost. We've surveyed many times over the year our customers and other enterprise customers, and often we find that for any production database, you may have 5, 6, 7 copies of that lying around your environment. So you may have various test environments, certainly various development environments. You may have training environments, beta or user acceptance environments in other cases. And that's expensive. I mean, managing storage is just something that takes time and effort. And so there's this huge cost in allocating that storage or purchasing it up, as well as the sprawl across many machines. Just keeping track of where all your data is and how I can allocate that data is a problem. These days I have plenty of customers that don't have 1 or 2 file groups and 1 or 2 files for their databases. They may have dozens of files across 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 file groups, and because their systems have grown over time, you find they've got multiple drives in production, and when they move that database to development or to test, they have to figure out how to move all those files around onto perhaps more drives, perhaps fewer drives, but they have to find ways to allocate that space. Every one of those items is a bit of friction, and it becomes difficult for us to move quickly. And then data security in the middle here is one of those big deals. More and more of us are being bound by legislation in different ways. In the EU, we have GDPR, so that's applying to almost everybody that has any type of personal information that relates to an individual, to a human. But in the US and other countries, we've had plenty of legislation as well. So in the US, SOX applies to public companies. We have HIPAA, we have various other regulations that potentially are going to come down or be passed by governments that are similar to GDPR. And so we have to worry about data security. And if I have to worry about changing emails, or if I have to worry about deleting them out of a system, that is a delay, that's a blocker to me moving quickly and building a smooth process. If I don't use production data though, what I find often is I haven't tested my system well, because I haven't covered the various edge cases, the various odd things that occur in my production data. So we get nulls, we get zeros, we get dates that are in certain ranges, all kinds of dirty types of data elements in production, and we don't often think to build those in our development environments. So if a developer has to build test data, they may build dozens of rows or small hundreds of rows, not all the different cases that occur. And so that limits our ability to do testing. which means that the quality of our software is often lower. And certainly the integrity of our system sometimes is lower because we don't think about those potential edge cases occurring in development, and so when they occur in production, it's problematic. And then often when we're working with these big environments, if I've got a terabyte database, I can't allocate many copies of that. Even if I did have that 4 or 5 copies, often it means the developers are sharing one, and those 3 or 4 other copies might be used for different purposes, which means that we have conflicts inherently. When we can't work in our own sandbox, in our own environment to test things, we are bound and limited by the collisions that occur between 2 different individuals. And that can occur both in development between developers or in testing, where the QA type people have to handle different situations, and one of those may conflict with another person's situation, and that slows down our process. And again, the whole idea here is that we don't want the database to be a bottleneck. We want things to actually go faster and smoother. So what do we really want to do? At Redgate, we spend a lot of time trying to think of how we can improve database development. And as we started to come up with the SQL Clone product, and as we started to do more database DevOps work, we try to think of what's the ideal, what is the best way to do things, and then where can we make that easier. So ultimately, what I want to be able to do is provision environments for development and test areas in a compliant fashion. And ideally, I want all of these things on the slide to occur. So I want an overview of where all the copies of my data are. That helps me understand what is my attack surface area, where are all the places that I might have to potentially worry about some type of hacking or some type of human mistake. So having a single central view of all copies is very important. But I also need some flexibility. The way that you do software development is not the way that we do it at Redgate. As a matter of fact, the way we do it at Redgate is not quite the way that I have done it in various companies of the past. And so we want to give control over however we're going to do provisioning to the individual so they can meet the needs that they have. When we look across our customer base, we have customers that work in multiple languages and multiple environments. Some are centralized, some of them are very distributed. So we want to give them the ability to control their provisioning process however they need to do it. And then of course we want to protect and sanitize sensitive data. If you've watched any of the other talks today, I know Grant talked about it briefly, Richard showed some of that. We want to have a way where we can ensure that we mask, anonymize, or somehow remove that sensitive data from the environments where it doesn't need to exist. And then of course we want to make sure that we can alter security, both changing the security access in our databases because we have security in SQL Server, but we also make sure that we can control the access for who can move data around, who can create copies of databases. And that's very important as well. And then we want a DevOps process here for provisioning, just like you might do for building software. We want to make sure that you have a consistent process that is repeatable and reliable without any risk. And so having the ability to automate your process is very important. Not only from protecting you from making mistakes or doing something wrong, but also it's something that can be audited. So if an authority in the EU for GDPR purposes wants to see what you did, or an auditor or regulator in the US for SOX or PCI or HIPAA or something else, they can see exactly what's occurring. That's very important in terms of trying to be compliant. And then of course, going along with that, we want a record of everything that's happened. Not just for compliance, not just to satisfy an auditor or authority of some sort, but also allows us to see where our process could be improved. We know exactly what's happened, we know exactly who did something and when. We can decide, do we need to tighten up access, loosen access, do we need to change the process to be more streamlined or efficient? We have all these things. So this is our goal, this is what we want to meet. While we're doing that, we want to make sure we do what's called data minimization. Now, the GDPR has kind of talked about this, but it is something that has been in HIPAA and other regulations as well. And that doesn't mean that we delete data, we remove data. But what it means is that we're trying to limit the use and the potential risk of this data as much as possible. So if I don't need real email addresses, I don't need real birth dates or something else, I shouldn't be using that. If I don't need to deploy it to a developer, but I do need it for a test person, I want to do that. I want to make sure that I minimize the use and potential risk of this data wherever possible. So this is part of what we're going to do. And as we do that, we often want to do one of these things where we de-identify data so it's not related to a specific person any longer. I want to make sure it's pseudonymized or anonymized in some way so that it's, I guess, fake data or something that isn't going to cause problems if it's released. Now, Redgate, as we've looked at this ideal we have and as we've tried to figure out how we can make this better, we've come up with a solution that we think works really well for many people. Now, we have SQL Provision, which is a bundle we've put together of a couple different products. Some of you may have seen SQL Clone in the past. We released it a couple years ago, and it's been on some of our SQL in the City streams in the past, and it's an amazing product. I showed it briefly in that first demo, but it's one of those things that truly would have changed the way I did software development if I'd have had it 10 years ago. Because now I don't have to worry about a specific database and keep control of it and worry about what the changes are and if I've broken anything. I have the freedom to just treat my database in some sense just like I would treat the code I have in my application. And if I make a mistake, I recreate another database. Just like in code, if I made a mistake, I could reload the entire thing from our version control system and kind of abandon all the work that I've done and move forward in a different way. So it's truly an amazing product. And what we've done is we've matched that together with Data Masker. Data Masker for SQL Server is a product that we purchased and have kind of been updating and working on over the last year. And what this really allows us to do is protect that sensitive data by masking it and anonymizing it or replacing it in some way, so that as I distribute copies of my databases to development or to test environments, to automated processes, that I haven't increased the risk of any of that sensitive data being released. And that's ultimately a goal, that I want to ensure that all of these environments can access the data they need, but in a safe, controlled, secure manner. Now, SQL Provision kind of meets all of those things that I'm trying to do, and it has a lot of benefits as well. So one of the things that has been fantastic with SQL Clone is that we virtualize our data. So you saw me just take that 91 gigabyte database, and in 6 or 7 seconds I created a new one. That's because I virtualized this data out. And so I have an image of the data, but I can share it out to multiple developers, and I can recreate databases on demand, which means I save a ton of time, right, in only a few seconds, and I save a ton of space because I don't have to distribute that tens of gigabytes or tens of terabytes to multiple people. They can all look at a single copy, and it appears as if they have their own environment, their own sandbox, where they can do whatever they want without impacting other developers. And then, of course, because it's the full data set or the full size, I have better testing as well. Now, along with that, by using Data Masker, we mask that sensitive data out, and it's very customizable, and I'll show you here in a few minutes. But it's kind of incredible that almost anything you need to do to change data around, you can do with Data Masker. You don't want to change all your data, because don't forget, if I'm updating data, that takes physical time and effort and everything else. But I can customize this to work with just the sensitive data that I'm particularly worried about. And then, of course, while I showed you the GUI and I showed you a way that I could do this self-service by clicking on some buttons, ultimately, I want to automate this as much as possible so that I have the ability to make a repeatable, reliable process that occurs the same way every single time. So building that automation in means that people don't have to submit tickets as often. I can give automated tools to developers or embed them in systems. I can give automated tools to DBAs so that they don't have to do it more than once. They solve the process, and then they have the system redo that over and over and over again. And then my central console, which we showed briefly, lets me see where all the copies of my databases are, where instances they're deployed on, and I understand exactly what's happened. And I have the ability to both audit things as well as control them. So there's permissioning as well, and I'll show you some of that. So with that, let's pop back over and let's look at it. So I showed you the SQL clone, and we can see here is that I load my dashboard. I've got multiple databases here listed. And on some of these, I've got, they're various sizes. I've got clones for some I don't have clones. My Stack Overflow, I have it. Some of them, other ones I don't. But what I really want to be able to do is make this process automated so that I have the ability to deploy new clones of databases, meet my developers' needs wherever possible. Now, one of the things I'll do as I come over here is I have this database that's a kind of a demo database, and it's just mocked up, and it allows me to test and do different things and show you how masking works. And if I look here, I'm just looking at one table. I've got some names which are probably sensitive information. I've got emails which are probably sensitive as well, but if you'll notice, the email is related to those names. So I'm using first name dot last name at some domain here. I've got an ID and a customer gender. Those probably aren't items I need to worry about masking because they're not necessarily sensitive, but certainly the credit card would be something here. There's other fields in this table, but I'm not going to worry about them at all. What I really want to do is get a copy of this data down to developer, but in a way that isn't sensitive. It isn't going to increase my risk because I want to be able to alter, mask, and anonymize this data as I go. So let's do that. Now I've got a little bit of PowerShell here that I'm going to use, and this is not terribly long. You can see it's 38 lines with some white space and comments and things. But what essentially I'm going to do is I'm going to take that production database, and then what I'm going to do is build an image of it and then apply some masking to it. So let's do that. So I've got a script. I'll just run that PowerShell right here, and we'll see that occur. And if I come back over to my dashboard, what we'll see in a moment is that it's starting to build me a new image from this database. And so what this is essentially doing is it's making a single copy of my database, and it's going to apply the masking rules here in a minute, and it's going to then change that data around in a way that allows me to use it for development purposes, but it keeps it safe and secure by anonymizing the information that's in there. Now this image is essentially the size of a backup because we're copying the data, and then I'm going to present this as multiple databases. So when I create a clone, it's a copy of this image, which to SQL Server looks exactly like the original database, but it's not. I don't have to have a separate copy for each individual. I've got just one copy that everybody is sharing. However, I have the ability to read and write. So this isn't like the Microsoft shared scalable databases where multiple instances could access the database, but they couldn't change it. Here, every developer, every single clone is a writable copy, just like it was their own database. So you can see I've created the image. That probably took a little less than a minute there. Granted, this is a small 100 megabyte database. But now I'm creating these clones, and my automation is automatically deploying this for me so that I don't have to do this. And we have customers that do this on a nightly basis. They create a new image that is a copy of their production system. They run masking rules or obfuscation rules against it. And then they deploy out new copies to developers, or they just allow the developers to pick a new copy whenever they're ready. So if I go back to my instance, you'll notice I only have the one data masker demo item here. But if I refresh my list of databases, what I'll find is I've created those multiple copies here. So these are my development databases. Now I deployed them to the same instance, but I could deploy them to different instances if I want. So let's see what happened here. I'm going to take this same query and I'm going to, in fact, put it in another window. And I'm going to pick a different database. I'm going to mess with my database. And then what I want to do is I'm going to make it a vertical tab group so that we can see these side by side. Now, as I said, I could have deployed these to different instances, but just to keep things simpler here, I'll just do it on one. Let's execute this query. Now you'll notice in the original database, the first row here has customer ID 10 million or 100,000 or something here for a male. And here I've got the same information. So this wasn't changed at all. But the names have changed. As a matter of fact, if I scroll over, you'll see that the first and last name was altered. And the same thing occurs for all of those rows. So these are ordered by that customer ID, but I've replaced all these names with different values. But what's even better is that I've replaced the emails as well, which is sensitive information, but I've kept it in a format that still makes sense to my application. So if I'm developing a system, I can look at this and say, what have I actually done? And here I transformed these to first initial, last name. I could have transformed them to first name, last name, but I wanted to show you that this is flexible. I have the ability to change things around, so I'm not bound by whatever rule is there. But I've matched this up. So the last name you can see has been applied here, and the domains have actually changed as well. So just because this is a demo system, I don't want real emails out there. I accidentally hit a domain. But you can see that these have actually changed here. I've even got my Way Out West top domain here. And then, of course, for something like a credit card number, there's valid and invalid credit card numbers. It's a known domain, right? We know it's a 16-digit number, or whatever type of credit card you have, there's a certain size to it. I've changed these around, so I've used Data Masker to actually alter these items so that they're still valid. If I had an application or a check in my application that looks for valid credit card numbers, it would still look at valid credit card numbers here by changing these. And this is, of course, a real usable database, so it's something I can write to. So I've got the originals here. Let's change over here. We'll mess with Grant's database because Grant's hanging out. we could do something like, let's update customer, and we'll set the first name equal to Grant, because that's what Grant would probably do. Of course, that's silly. We wouldn't want to change them all to Grant, would we? But you can see I've changed this database, right? I've been able to write to it. But it's not, I'm not sharing a copy because these haven't changed on my development database, right? There's a separate value here. To SQL Server, both of these look like real databases. If we look at the properties, they look as if they're a full-sized real database. And just so I can show you that, this original one is at 100 megabytes. We look at the properties, right? Actually, this one's 16 megabytes because it's small. And what's this one set to? It should be the same. It looks exactly the same because it's a copy. Okay? And in fact, I think we've got other stuff in there. I'm only using 46 megabytes for each of these copies. Now, how do I do the masking? Well, this is Data Masker for SQL Server. This is the original version that we purchased and we're selling now. I think in the last session, Richard showed you where we're going with it. But you can see here, it's got just this list of rules. And essentially, we're executing these in order from top to bottom. So we go down this list. Now, at the beginning and end, we disable and enable triggers. That allows us to alter data without having other problems occur. But I have these series of rules. Now, I can set these up to run in parallel. And we have customers that do that so that they can perform the masking very quickly by using separate threads to attack different sets of data. Or we can have things depend on each other. So you see that these two rules are indented. And that means that one has to run first and one has to run second. So it allows me to control serial things. And if I look at this, so you can see, you'll notice here I'm changing 5 columns at the same time. So I'm changing the first name and last name and the credit card number and the telephone. And as you can see, I've got all these data sets that allow me to kind of pick and choose what types of data do I want to add. And I can customize these or change these or add new data sets as possible. But in this case, you'll notice one of the things I'm doing when I'm doing the names is I'm changing this to female first name. So I'm using this set so that everything is a female. When I come to my second rule, though, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to change the first names to male names, which is the data set that I've chosen. But then I'm using a where clause. And this is just standard T-SQL where clauses where I'm going to filter out which items I'm going to update. So this allows me to selectively match data up to other parts of my database. And what's more is I'm doing in my last rule, this is where I'm fixing that email address. So in this case, I'm doing that substring of the first name. I could easily take this out and just say, I want this to exactly match what is being done in the original system, which is just first name plus last name. And so what I can do is just remove this. And then if I were to run this masking set, then we would see the full first name, a period, full last name, at, and then I've built a domain using 2 different parameters here. So I've got random series of dictionary text and then a second level domain type of item that's there. So by setting up all these rules, I have the ability to customize the masking however I need to, and it's as flexible as possible. The other thing I wanted to show you when I come here is that this is a repeatable process. So I built these clones. If I were to rerun my process here, what we'll see is that it's removing those databases, so they would disappear off the instances, and then it's going to build me a new clone. Now, if I was going to supply a new set of images to my developers every day, I could certainly do this, where I replace everything, and I could go back and just, when the developers come in and connect with Management Studio the next day, everything looks the same. Or I could create a new image with a new name and deploy new images, on a rolling basis, so they would have an old image and a new image with old database and new database, and that way they can kind of move forward over time or move forward as needed. We're entirely flexible and we allow you to do whatever you want. By providing a PowerShell interface here, we can flexibly do whatever we want, and at the same time I have the ability to include masking in here or really any arbitrary T-SQL script that I want to run when I build the image. So in addition to using Data Masker to do masking, I could add some additional items in there. I could inject a specific known curated data set in there. Anything I could run in T-SQL, I could run as part of this process. And I have the ability to control what's going on. So I have permission in here. You'll notice I've got a few different users and groups here where I can set their roles. So they have the ability to decide, can they create images? Can they only create databases or clones? Or can they do anything they want? So I have the ability to control how I run this process. And these permissions apply with the PowerShell as well. So just because I give somebody automation doesn't mean they can automatically copy that production data from another system. They'd have to have the permissions here as well. I think that clone and data mask present a kind of an amazing solution that allows me to build a process that works extremely well. And if I go back to kind of my list of things that we wanted, all the items that I'm trying to accomplish are kind of checked. So I'm unblocking the teams and allow them to move faster because I'm allowing for self-service, I'm allowing for automation. I can click in the GUI, I can build PowerShell, I can deploy that out to people. I can even have automated jobs running that build these things as well. So that allows me to move faster in a DevOps world where the database is now not a blocker in terms of provisioning, in terms of getting copies out to developers and DBAs. I reduce the time that I spend trying to juggle storage. I've got so many customers that struggle with this on a regular basis because they restore one copy of production and somebody needs a copy for a different reason, or a new developer starts, or a new project begins. How do I deal with that? Well, SQL Provision allows me to do that because I can quickly build those copies of the databases using SQL Clone and appropriately mask them as needed. And I'm ensuring that way that I don't have any sensitive data and I'm complying with any process that is out there. Because I can do this kind of ad hoc on demand with as many copies as I want, and because we don't charge you by the copy, then I can give every team, every developer, every group, every part of my software development pipeline their own copy of the database, or multiple copies if they need that, which allows us to be more flexible in how we perform development and usually move a little bit faster. And then because I have those large-scale production databases, I can shift my testing left. Right, so that I have the ability to see the impact of my software changes on data, or see the impact of data on the software changes earlier in the process, quick and easy and early. So developers can see it, QA can see it. We're not waiting for that one staging or one performance test environment. And then, of course, SQL Provision wraps this all up in that single view, that dashboard that lets me understand exactly what is going on. Now, I think Data Mask is kind of amazing, and it's a very, very powerful tool, but it's not the most ingeniously simple tool I've seen. So at Redgate, we're actually trying to do one thing better, and we've got Project Fig Leaf underway, which Richard showed a little bit in the last session. So if you weren't attending, you might go back and watch it. But we have an early access beta period out there. And if you'd like to participate and you'd like to see where we're going with data masking and see how this might be easier for you, we'd love for you to go to Project Fig Leaf and sign in and say, I'm interested in the beta. And we'll work with you to get your feedback and give you access to the way the software is evolving. And that helps us learn, but it also gives you the chance to influence the product and maybe get your needs met in a certain way. So that's all I've got for SQL Provision today. Hopefully I've helped you understand a little bit about how Redgate would like to help you both move faster in a DevOps process, unblock developers by making the database provisioning easy, but do that in a compliant manner so that we are minimizing the attack surface area. We are minimizing the chance that any type of data breach, any hack, any type of problem in test or development would impact our company. We wouldn't release real data in some way. So my contact information is up there if you'd like to get a hold of me, or please feel free, you can email us at sqlprovision@redgate.com, or you can go to the redgate.com/hub where we've got a bunch of information on SQL Provision written there, and you can read about different ways that customers are using it that it's helping them speed up their development. So next, we're a little bit early, but we're going to have Grant join us, and we're going to talk a little bit about his new book, which he's very excited about. He's probably the most excited person there is. And then we'll have Kathy Kellenberger, editor of Simple Talk, talking about monitoring or something. I don't know. Kathy's doing something interesting. So we'll be right back.